course, ma'am.
Good evening, sir. I'm here.
Ah, yes, okay. Wrong gender, but go ahead.
My question is related to the saffronization of higher education institutions. We have been witnessing this in India for last 10-15 years and in Gujarat for last 30 years. So how do you see the idea of a university in this kind of scenario, or how to cultivate the idea of critical thinking or academic freedom where students are not allowed to participate in protest? We have the evidence of Gujarat Vidyapeeth or JNU. So how do you see this scenario and the idea of a university?
I hope you're not trying to get St. Xavier's College into trouble for me answering that question. No, I have a profound problem with this, because I think, honestly, universities are precisely the places where young people grow up, discover what matters to them, what they care passionately about, what they're prepared to protest about and to fight for. And if we start stifling their ability to do that, we are stunting their growth as individuals. To my mind, there can be reasonable limits. You can't allow violence. You can't allow students intimidating, bullying, bashing up other students. You can't allow them to sort of ransack the principal's office. Those are all crimes under the penal code, under the laws of the land. But you should never deny students the right to march peacefully in protest, to hold protest gatherings, to address each other and argue a particular point of view. And I personally have seen too many who have grown out of this phase, but for whom this phase was an important part of their growing up. And I would never want to prevent them, because ultimately, how do you grow? I mean, the old joke is that, we all make mistakes, and it is through our mistakes that we acquire experience and wisdom. And so the point is that there will be many of these protesters who are completely wrong-headed, but let them find out. I had two friends who were not just extreme leftist in my college and my batch, but were sort of left of the known left. I mean, they were sort of Trotskyites and so on. And both of them in adult life ended up as supporters of the BJP. Both of them. Both became MPs of the BJP. And these are both people who were in college with me. So I know their trajectory personally very well. But if we had denied them the right to have their ideological views, to express them, even to attend protest rallies and speak at protest rallies and so on, would we have actually done them any good? It's precisely because they held extreme views, learned what was right and wrong about them, and eventually came around to a different point of view, that we have the individuals that they became today. And to my mind, this is extremely important. I would never, ever agree to the stifling of protest. I would agree to the prohibition of unlawful activities, especially anything involving violence or incitement to violence. But short of that, the expression of views, as I partially jokingly said, the right to be a heretic is fundamental to my idea of the university. If you can't have a safe space on a university campus to say pretty much anything you like, however wrong-headed, however ill-informed it is, then why are you in a university? What is the university for? I feel very strongly that this is something we should always permit.
Yeah. And we'll have the question from Susan, I believe. But just a gentle reminder, sir has shared many good ideas and insights with us and has challenged us. So let us remain focused on the discourse that's happening this evening. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Anil. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for, as usual, your eloquence as well as the wide variety of ideas. I was struck by the example you gave us of this young girl with human potential going to waste, killing herself because of, well, lack of funds. But you see, you said that you were able to do something about it. What is it that we can do when we can't do anything about it, when people in power choose to look the other way, when people who can do things, in fact, close down courses, close down universities, close down intellectual freedom? Oh, by the way, I teach English literature, so that's pretty much ouch. That's not working. What do we do when people whose job it is to ensure freedom of speech don't?
Tough question to which there is no easy answer. I mean, I would say that in a democracy, what we should do is work for, agitate for, and vote for an atmosphere that encourages and permits all this. But it's also true that perhaps the majority don't share our preoccupation with such freedoms. Perhaps academic freedom is not going to be a vote-winning demand. Maybe it's a preoccupation of educated elites. I don't know. But the best each of us can do is to stand up and speak out for what we believe in and be prepared to face the consequences. Now, many find that difficult to do, and I don't blame them. I'm far from being judgmental about that. But I will say that academic freedom, as I explained, and freedom of expression at the human level are both fundamental elements in a democracy. And if we are a democracy, which we are and we claim to be, and our constitution supports, then we should exercise those freedoms which the constitution permits us to do. I'm not sure that's a satisfactory answer, but it's the best I can offer.
Thank you, sir. Yes, that was straight from the heart, I believe. So that's great enough. Yes, Fiona?
Good evening, sir. Welcome to St. Xavier's College. Big fan of yours, firstly.
Thank you.
And my question goes something like this, that with the rise of privatization...
Please hold the mic a little closer. I'm missing some of your words.
Please.
Hello,
Hold
am
it
I
close.
audible now?
Yeah, no, much better.
Yeah. With the rise of privatization in higher education, so what are your viewpoints on fair and equal access of good education to everyone in the future?
Sorry, whatization of education?
Privatization.
Privatization.
Privatization. Now, this is, we talked about it already. This is genuinely a problem because obviously at the moment we do have an enormous spurt in the growth of private universities. Remarkable. And some of extremely high quality. Places like Jindal University, Shiv Nadar University, Azim Premji University. I mean, there are a lot of these coming up which have got a very good reputation, which are already attracting symbiosis. I mean, there are half a dozen private institutions in India which are even getting global attention, making it to world rankings and so on. Mr. Ambani is coming up with a university. I have no doubt that people who have the money and the resources can set up in India institutions of high quality. But the problem remains who has access to them. So as I said in response to the earlier question, the only thing I can advocate is there must be some way in which scholarships are mandated, are necessary, so that at least some of the students coming into these universities will be able to use their private education as a life-transforming experience, because they'll get an opportunity they could not have afforded without that scholarship, without that support. I'd like to see that happening right across. I must say, because I benefited from that in America, and I see it so widespread in America, I would love to see more affluent institutions in India doing that. Now, you could argue America, they built it up over centuries. They all have big endowments, and the interest from those endowments they can afford to give in scholarships and so on. And we don't have that yet because all these universities are very new. I think Jindal is less than 15 years old, Shiv Nadar maybe slightly older but not much, etc., etc. So you could argue that some of these private, Ashoka University already got an outstanding reputation in liberal arts, and they're barely 10 years or 11 years old. So you're looking at a body of high-quality institutions that haven't had the time to build up the resource base to offer scholarships. Well, my answer is tough. Then out of your current operating expenses, you have to earmark a certain percentage for scholarships. You cannot, in a country like ours with the great inequalities in our country, you cannot have private education that is purely elitist. That is, and that is not even elitism of merit, but elitism of money. That is something that is very difficult to accept.
Yes, sir. And to mention it to you that one of the existential threats facing the Jesuit education today in India is privatization of education. We cannot go into it because we also have a target group to cater to at affordable rates. So that remains one of the issues we have. But we'll have a next question from Nivid Desai.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. It's an honor. My question to you would be something around the lines of teaching and learning. The schools teach a certain way, and the universities need to graduate from that level of teaching and to introduce a new pedagogy, if I may say so. And we have had different kinds of experiments around didactic versus discursive. What thought would you have about maybe the present situation of universities as we see it in India and abroad, as well as the future of university? How should teaching and learning both evolve with time?
Well, I partly addressed that in my remarks when I talked about the importance of not getting students to regurgitate what they have memorized by rote from the textbooks or the lectures. I've said that we should not teach them what to think, we should teach them how to think. I've said we need not a well-filled mind, but a well-formed mind. But I'd go even one step beyond that and say that in school, you're supposed to learn how to answer the questions. In college, you better learn how to question the answers. And I think this is very important. Now, methods of imparting knowledge, honestly, a lot of what we're doing in our country is still very woefully out of date. Whenever I address gatherings of school principals, and I had the joy, I think 2 of the last 3 years I was invited to address the Association of Jesuit Principals from all over the country, about 300, 400 of them. And I told them precisely this, that, you've got to move away from just telling the children. You've got to not just have them ask you why, you've also got to encourage them to ask you why not. You've got to get them into classroom discussions where they can actually think for themselves. Give them a topic you haven't taught them and make them present it in the class. Make them think, make them understand something. Have another student challenge what they've taught. Let them discuss it. These are methods that we just don't use enough in India in the school system. And we need to do that. I mean, both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, when they were asked, what are the quality you most look for when you interview somebody for a job, they both said out-of-the-box thinking. Who does out-of-the-box thinking in India? In India, it's, the teacher says, when the student asks why or why not, the teacher says, because I told you so. Sit down. Repeat this in the examination. That's not good enough. We really have to encourage. The box, of course, is a conventional wisdom, what everyone has always done. The out-of-the-box thinking is thinking beyond. Now, of course, some of the out-of-the-box thinking might be crazy. So, if the teacher teaches in science class, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and the student stands up and says, why can't the sun one day rise in the west and set in the east? That may be out of the box, but it's also a wrong-headed question, and the teacher has to politely and firmly explain why that's simply inconceivable. But imagine a student, say 20 years ago, asking a science teacher, why does a car need petrol? And the science teacher talks about the internal combustion engine and how it has to move the wheels and the motor to get the vehicle moving forward. And the student is still not satisfied. Why does it have to be petrol? The teacher says, now you shut up and sit down. That's the answer. Write that in your exam. That student may have gone on to suddenly think, why can't I find ways of powering the car only through electricity? And indeed, we found out in the last 15, 20 years, the advent of the electric vehicle, the battery-operated car, and the transformation, which would have seemed a ridiculous question 20 years earlier, is now entirely not only feasible, but considered more desirable than the internal combustion engine. So that kind of thing of encouraging people to imagine what has not existed before and to see if what they have learned can equip them to move towards creating that which they have imagined. That's the kind of thinking that the world is moving on. We don't do enough of that. And the irony is we used to. For 1,000 years, we were world leaders in innovation, in scientific discovery. The world's first plastic surgery recorded in humanity was by Susruta, who conducted a rhinoplasty, a nose operation, meticulously recorded the procedures, and some of his instruments have been found by archaeologists. The invention of the zero, the idea that you could have a symbol representing nothing and that would simplify your calculations. The creation of the decimal system, all done by Indians. The discovery that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around was not by Galileo, it was by Aryabhatta and other Indian astronomers 1,000 years before Galileo. But we don't sufficiently appreciate all of this. We invented the zero, but these days it seems that all we invent is zero. And we have to change from there now.